I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who'd feel a knife twist in her chest at the sight of her own daughter. But here I am, standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be our grand family escape, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and sorrow. My name is Ellen Harper, and for years, I poured everything into raising Claire, my only child, my pride, my world. I worked double shifts at the hospital, scrimped on every luxury, and dreamed of the day we'd share something extraordinary, something to stitch us closer after years of growing apart. That dream was a month-long trip to Italy, a celebration of her 30th birthday and my 50th, a chance to rediscover each other under Tuscan skies. I'd saved for years, every penny a promise, every overtime hour a step toward that dream. But Claire canceled it. She said she couldn't leave her new husband, Mark, or his mother, Diane, who'd been struggling since her husband passed. I believed her. I trusted her. Until I found out the truth. It started with a phone call 3 weeks before our departure. Claire's voice was tight, apologetic, the kind of tone you use when you're breaking bad news but don't want to linger on it. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said. "I can't go. Mark needs me here, and Diane. She's not doing well. It's just bad timing." I remember the way my stomach sank, but I swallowed it down. I told her I understood, that family comes first, that we'd reschedule. I canceled the non-refundable tickets, ate the cost, and tried to ignore the hollow ache in my chest. I'd been so sure this trip would be our chance to mend things that started fraying when she married Mark 2 years ago. He's a good man, steady, but his mother, Diane, clings to him like ivy, and Claire, eager to please, let herself get tangled in that grip. I thought I could wait it out, that Claire would come back to me. I was wrong. A month after the cancellation, I was sorting through bills when I noticed a charge on my credit card, a charge I hadn't made. $5,000 for a luxury villa in Florence. My heart stopped. I called the bank, thinking it was fraud, but they confirmed the booking was made under Claire's name, linked to my card through a shared account we'd never closed. I sat there, staring at the statement, my mind racing. Why would Claire book a villa? She'd said she couldn't go. I dug deeper, my hands shaking as I logged into her social media, something I hadn't done in years. And there it was, photos of Claire, Mark, and Diane in Italy, laughing in vineyards, posing by ancient ruins, living the trip I'd planned for us. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. My daughter hadn't just canceled our trip, she'd stolen it, handed it to her mother-in-law, and left me to foot the bill. I spent that night pacing, torn between tears and fury. How could she do this? Claire, who I'd raised to value honesty, who I'd taught to cherish family above all else, had lied to me, used me, and discarded our plans like they meant nothing. I thought of calling her, screaming into the phone, demanding answers, but something stopped me. Rage, yes, but also a colder, sharper instinct, one I hadn't felt in years. I wanted justice. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I wanted to unravel the perfect little world she'd built on my dime and make her see me again, not as the mother she could push aside, but as someone who deserved better. The next morning, I drove to her house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. The plan was forming, jagged and raw, but clear. I wouldn't confront her yet. I'd wait, watch, and find a way to turn this betrayal back on her. Claire's house was a tidy Cape Cod, the kind of place I'd dreamed of giving her when she was a girl. I parked across the street, hidden by a row of oaks, and watched as she and Mark loaded suitcases into their car. Diane was there, too, her silver hair catching the morning light as she fussed over a travel bag. They were leaving again, another trip, I guessed, funded by who knows whose money. My money, probably. The sight of them together, laughing like they hadn't a care in the world, lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let this go. I started small. I called the villa's management company, posing as Claire's assistant, and confirmed the details of their stay. They'd been there for 2 weeks, wining and dining, while I sat at home mourning our lost trip. I asked about cancellations, refunds, anything that could claw back what was mine. The manager was sympathetic but firm. No refunds without proof of fraud. Fine, I thought. I'd find another way. I spent days digging through Claire's digital footprint emails, bank records, anything I could access through our old shared accounts. She hadn't covered her tracks well. There were receipts for wine tastings, museum tickets, even a private cooking class, all charged to my card. Each discovery was a fresh cut, but it also fueled me. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. I decided to hit her where it hurt, her perfect image. Claire prided herself on being the dutiful daughter-in-law, the one who could do no wrong in Mark's or Diane's eyes. I started dropping hints to Mark's family, casual texts about how disappointed I was that Claire couldn't make our trip, how I'd been saving for years to make it special. I sent Diane a photo of the itinerary I'd planned, letting her think it was an innocent mistake, a mix-up in communication. I could almost feel her unease through the phone, the way she hesitated before responding with vague apologies. Claire, of course, didn't suspect a thing. She was too busy playing the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, to notice the cracks I was prying open. One night, I found myself at their house again, this time uninvited. It was late, the street quiet, the rain starting to fall in soft sheets. I sat in my car, watching the glow of their living room window, imagining them inside, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. I had a key. Claire had given it to me years ago, back when we were close. I could walk in, confront her, lay every lie bare. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I slipped out of the car and walked to their mailbox, my hands trembling as I taped a note to the side. "You can't hide forever." It was vague, ominous, enough to make her wonder. I wanted her to feel watched, to question her choices, to feel the weight of her betrayal creeping closer. As I drove home, the rain hammering my windshield, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what was mine, me, dignity, my trust, my place in my daughter's life. I didn't know how far I'd go, but I knew I wouldn't stop until Claire understood what she'd done. Until she saw me again, not as the mother she could betray, but as the woman who'd given her everything and deserved so much more in return. The days after I left that note felt like walking a tightrope. Every moment was a balance between keeping my anger in check and letting it guide me. I couldn't stop thinking about Claire's face in those photos, her smile so bright it mocked me. She was living a life I'd paid for, a life I'd dreamed of sharing with her, and she hadn't even blinked at the lie. I kept my routine normal work at the hospital, dinners alone, the occasional call to check in with Claire, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I didn't want her to suspect I knew. Not yet. I needed her to feel safe, to keep building her fragile house of cards so I could watch it collapse when the time was right. I started gathering more evidence, piecing together the scope of her deception. I found an email from Claire to Diane, sent a week before she canceled our trip. "Mom, I know it's sudden, but Mark and I want to take you to Italy. It'll be good for you after everything." My heart twisted at the word mom. She'd called Diane that, not me, the woman who'd raised her, who'd bandaged her knees and stayed up nights worrying when she was sick. I read on, each word a fresh wound. Claire had planned the trip meticulously, down to the vineyard tours and the private chef. She'd used my credit card for every detail, never mentioning it to me, never asking. It wasn't just the money, it was the deliberate erasure of me from her life. I decided to play a longer game. I called Mark, keeping my tone light, asking how Diane was holding up. He was warm, oblivious, telling me how much the Italy trip had lifted her spirits. "Claire really stepped up," he said, pride in his voice. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and agreed, planting a seed. "I'm so glad she could make it work." I was heartbroken when she canceled our trip, but I guess Diane needed her more. There was a pause, a flicker of confusion in his response, but he didn't press. I didn't need him to. I just needed him to start wondering. At work, I confided in my friend Susan, a nurse who'd seen me through my worst days. I told her everything, my voice breaking as I described the betrayal. She listened, her eyes soft but sharp, and suggested I confront Claire directly. "You're her mother, Ellen. She needs to hear how much this hurt you." But I shook my head. A confrontation would be too easy, too quick. Claire would cry, apologize, maybe even mean it, but it wouldn't undo the lie. It wouldn't make her feel the weight of what she'd taken from me. I wanted her to unravel slowly, to question her choices, to see the cracks in her perfect life. I started leaving more notes. Small ones, cryptic, taped to their mailbox or slipped under their doormat when I knew they were out. "You can't outrun the truth. What did it cost you?" Each one was a pinprick, designed to make Claire uneasy without tipping my hand. I watched from a distance as she found them, her face tightening as she read, glancing around like she expected someone to step out of the shadows. I wasn't ready to reveal myself, but I wanted her to feel Mimi presence, my pain, my anger. One evening, I followed them to a restaurant, a fancy place downtown where they were celebrating Diane's birthday. I sat in my car, watching through the window as they laughed, clinked glasses, and passed plates of pasta. Claire looked radiant, her hair catching the candlelight, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who used to run to me with open arms. The memory stung, but it also hardened my resolve. I waited until they left, then slipped inside and asked the waiter about their bill. He confirmed it, paid with my card. Another betrayal, another cut. I thanked him and left, my mind racing with the next step. I started contacting the vendors from their trip tour guides, restaurants, even the villa's management posing as Claire's accountant, claiming there'd been a mix-up with the payment method. Most were sympathetic, offering to refund my card if I could provide proof of the error. I didn't have it yet, but I was working on it. I hacked together a paper trail, using old emails and screenshots, building a case that Claire had used my card without permission. It wasn't entirely true she'd had access to the account for years, but it was close enough to the truth to hold up. I wasn't stealing, I was taking back what was mine. The more I dug, the more I saw how deep Claire's loyalty to Diane ran. She'd written posts online about how Diane was like a second mother, how she'd helped her through tough times. Each word was a slap, a reminder that I'd been replaced. I started to wonder if this was about more than the trip, if Claire's betrayal was her way of choosing a new family, one that didn't include me. The thought was unbearable, but it also clarified things. If she wanted to play that game, I'd play too. I'd show her what it meant to lose someone you thought you could count on. I began reaching out to Claire's friends, casually mentioning how hurt I was about the canceled trip, how I'd been looking forward to bonding with her. I didn't accuse her outright, just let the story spread, knowing it would reach her eventually. I wanted her to hear it from others, to feel the weight of their judgment. I wanted her to squirm under the pressure of her own lies. And she did. I could tell from the way her texts became shorter, more guarded, the way she avoided meeting my eyes when I dropped by unannounced. She was starting to crack, and I hadn't even played my final card. That night, I sat at home with a glass of wine, staring at the itinerary I'd planned for us. The Colosseum, the Amalfi Coast, a little cafe in Florence where we'd drink espresso and talk about her dreams. I'd pictured us laughing, healing, becoming mother and daughter again. Instead, she'd given that dream to someone else. I set the itinerary down and picked up my phone, typing a new note. You broke my heart. Now it's your turn. I didn't know where I'd leave it yet, but I knew it would find her. And when it did, she'd know the truth was closing in. The notes were working. I could see it in Claire's eyes when I saw her next, a flicker of unease that hadn't been there before. She invited me over for coffee, her voice overly cheerful, like she was trying to paper over the cracks in our relationship. I went, not because I wanted to play nice, but because I wanted to see how far she'd go to keep up the act. Her house smelled of lavender and fresh bread, a warmth that felt like a mockery of the coldness between us. She chatted about work, Mark, the weather, anything but Italy. I let her ramble, sipping my coffee, waiting for an opening. When she mentioned Diane's tough year, I seized it. I bet that trip to Italy helped, I said, my tone light, but my eyes locked on hers. She froze, her cup halfway to her lips, and for a moment, I saw the truth flicker across her face: guilt, panic, fear. She recovered quickly, mumbling something about Diane deserving it, but the seed was planted. She knew I knew something. I didn't push further. I wanted her to stew, to wonder how much I'd uncovered. That night, I left another note, this time tucked into the windshield of her car. You can't buy loyalty with stolen dreams. I watched from my car as she found it the next morning, her hands shaking as she read it, her head whipping around to scan the empty street. I felt a thrill, not of joy, but of power. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one hurting alone. She was feeling it too, the weight of her choices, the fear of being exposed. I started to escalate. I contacted a lawyer, a friend from my hospital days who specialized in small claims. I laid out the facts: Claire's unauthorized use of my credit card, the thousands she'd spent without my consent. He warned me it was a gray area, our shared account complicated things, but he agreed to draft a letter, a formal demand for repayment. I didn't send it yet. I wanted to hold it like a loaded gun, ready to fire when the moment was right. Instead, I focused on Diane. She was the key, the one Claire was trying so hard to please. If I could drive a wedge between them, Claire's perfect world would start to crumble. I invited Diane for lunch, claiming I wanted to catch up. She was hesitant but agreed, probably out of guilt. We met at a quiet cafe, and I played the grieving mother to perfection. I told her how much the Italy trip had meant to me, how I'd saved for years, how Claire's cancellation had broken my heart. I watched her squirm, her polite smile faltering as she realized she'd been part of the lie. I had no idea, she said, her voice small. Claire said you were okay with it. I let the silence hang, let her feel the weight of those words. By the time we parted, I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was questioning Claire, maybe even resenting her for putting her in this position. Back home, I kept digging. I found a journal Claire had kept on her laptop, synced to an old cloud account we'd shared. It was a gold-min pages of her thoughts, her fears, her obsession with winning Diane's approval. She wrote about feeling torn, about how she'd wanted to go with me, but felt obligated to Diane. Mom will understand, she'd written. She always does. Those words burned. I wasn't her safety net anymore. I was her doormat. But the journal also gave me insight into her vulnerabilities. She was terrified of losing Mark, of not being enough for his family. That was my leverage. I started to manipulate the narrative. I sent anonymous emails to Mark's sister, Laura, hinting at Claire's financial mismanagement. I didn't outright accuse her, just suggested she'd been careless with family funds. Laura was protective of Mark, and I knew she'd confront Claire. Sure enough, a few days later, Claire called me, her voice shaking. "Mom, did you tell Laura I'm bad with money?" I played dumb, feigning concern, asking what she meant. She didn't push, but I could hear the strain in her voice. The cracks were spreading. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I couldn't stop. Every lie Claire had told, every dollar she'd spent, every moment she'd chosen Diane over might all fueled me. I started showing up at their house more often, unannounced, bringing small gifts or offering to help with chores. Each visit was a reminder of my presence, a way to keep Claire on edge. I'd catch her glancing at me, searching for signs I knew more than I was letting on. I'd smile, ask about her day, and leave another note when she wasn't looking. The truth always finds a way. One night, I went too far. I'd had a rough day at work, a patient coding under my hands, and the weight of everything Claire's betrayal, my loneliness, the endless scheming crashed down on me. I drove to their house in the pouring rain, my vision blurred with tears and rage. I stood outside, staring at their lit windows, and scrawled a note on a scrap of paper. "You'll pay for this." I taped it to their front door and drove away, my heart pounding. It was reckless, too direct, but I was past caring. I wanted her to feel trapped, cornered, the way I had when I saw those photos. The next day, Claire called, her voice trembling with anger. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you doing this?" I played innocent, asking what she meant, but she wasn't buying it. "The notes, Mom. I know it's you." I didn't deny it. I just hung up, my hands shaking. The game was shifting, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. But I knew one thing. Claire was scared, and for the first time, I felt like I was winning. Claire's call changed everything. She knew it was me, and the fragile control I'd held over this game was slipping. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone, her words echoing in my head. "Why are you doing this?" I wanted to scream back, to tell her how her betrayal had gutted me, how she'd taken my dream and handed it to someone else. But I didn't. I needed to stay calm, to keep the upper hand. She was rattled, and that was exactly where I wanted her. But I also knew I had to be careful now she was onto me, and one wrong move could turn her fear into defiance. I decided to pull back, to let her think she'd won. I stopped the notes, stopped showing up at her house. Instead, I focused on the legal angle. I sent the lawyer's letter, a formal demand for repayment of the $5,000 she'd spent on the villa, along with a detailed list of charges. I didn't expect her to pay not yet, but I wanted her to feel the pressure, to know I wasn't bluffing. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, she was at my door, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Mom, how could you do this?" she asked, holding the letter like it was a weapon. I let her in, my expression neutral, and asked her to explain. She paced my living room, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought you'd understand. Diane needed that trip, and I didn't know how to tell you." I listened, my heart torn between wanting to believe her and knowing she was still lying. She hadn't mentioned the money, the lies, the way she'd planned it all behind my back. I kept my voice steady. "Claire, you used my card. You didn't ask. You didn't even tell me you were going." She flinched, but her eyes hardened. "You've always been so controlling, Mom. I needed to do something for myself, for Mark's family. That's done controlling?" I'd given her everything, sacrificed everything. But I didn't argue. I just nodded, letting her think I was backing down. After she left, I felt a new kind of clarity. This wasn't just about the money or the trip anymore. It was about who Claire had become, about the distance between us that I hadn't seen growing. I'd been so focused on revenge, on making her pay, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I really wanted. Did I want to destroy her? To ruin her marriage, her relationship with Diane? Or did I want her back, me daughter, the one who used to call me her best friend? The answer wasn't clear, but it shifted something in me. I started to see the cost of my actions, Not just to Claire, but to myself. I called Susan again, needing someone to ground me. She listened as I poured out the whole story, the notes, the lawyer, the confrontation. "Ellen," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you're hurting yourself as much as you're hurting her. What do you want from this?" I didn't have an answer, not a clear one. I wanted justice, yes, but I also wanted my daughter. I wanted to understand why she'd chosen Diane over me, why she'd lied. Susan suggested I try talking to her, really talking, not manipulating or scheming. I wasn't ready for that, but her words stuck with me. I decided to shift my approach. Instead of more notes or legal threats, I sent Claire a letter not from the lawyer, but from me. It was short, honest, raw. "Claire, I've spent my life trying to give you everything. When you canceled our trip, it broke my heart. When I found out you went with Diane, it broke something else. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Talk to me." I mailed it, my hands trembling as I dropped it in the box. It was a risk, letting go of the control I'd been clinging to, but I needed to know if there was anything left to salvage. Days passed without a response. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the waiting. But every night, I checked my phone, my email, hoping for something from her. Nothing came. I started to wonder if I'd pushed her too far, if my notes and schemes had burned the last bridge between us. Then, one evening, I got a text. "Mom, can we talk? Tomorrow, my place." My heart leapt, but I tamped it down. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was a door opening, and I had to be ready for whatever was on the other side. I spent that night preparing, not for battle, but for truth. I went through the journal again, reading Claire's words, trying to understand her. She'd written about feeling trapped, about wanting to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, but never feeling like she was enough. I saw myself in those words, the pressure to be everything for everyone, the fear of failing. For the first time, I wondered if Claire's betrayal wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about her own struggles, her own need to prove herself. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made me see her as more than the villain I'd painted her to be. The next morning, I drove to her house, my stomach in knots. She opened the door, her face guarded but softer than before. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless meals when she was a girl. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she started, her voice low. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know how to tell you about Diane. I thought you'd be okay with it." I took a deep breath, ready to lay it all bare, to finally have the conversation we'd both been avoiding. The kitchen table felt like a battlefield, but one where neither of us wanted to draw blood anymore. Claire's eyes were downcast, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug, and I could see the weight she was carrying, guilt, maybe, or fear of what I'd say. I wanted to unload everything, to let the hurt and anger spill out, but I held back. This was my chance to understand, to maybe find a way back to her. I started softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Claire, I need to know why. Why you lied, why you used my card, why you chose Diane over me." She flinched, but she didn't look away. Her story came out in pieces, halting at first, then rushing like a dam breaking. She told me about Diane's grief, how losing her husband had left her fragile, clinging to Mark and, by extension, Claire. She talked about the pressure to be the perfect daughter-in-law, to prove she was worthy of Mark's family. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, her voice cracking. "Diane needed that trip, and I didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't think you'd mind as much." That stung, but I let her keep going. She admitted to using my card, saying it was easier than asking Mark for the money, that she'd planned to pay it back, but got caught up in the moment. "I know I messed up, Mom. I didn't mean to hurt you." I listened, my heart torn between empathy and disbelief. Her reasons made sense, in a twisted way, but they didn't erase the betrayal. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You lied to me, planned it all behind my back, and let me think it was my fault we didn't go. Do you know what that felt like?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. "I saved for years for that trip. It was supposed to be us, reconnecting, being a family again. And you gave it to someone else." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her close like I did when she was a child, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you'd be mad, that you'd think I was choosing Diane over you. And then it just happened." I wanted to believe her, but part of me wondered if she was still protecting herself, still hiding something. We talked for hours, peeling back layers of hurt and misunderstanding. I told her about the notes, the lawyer, The way her betrayal had pushed me to a place I didn't recognize. She looked horrified, but not angry. "I deserved it," she whispered. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you." For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance that we could rebuild something from this mess. But I also knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. Before I left, I asked her to pay back the money not because I needed it, but because I needed her to take responsibility. She nodded, promising to work it out with Mark. I didn't push for details, but I felt a weight lift, like we'd taken the first step towards something better. As I drove home, I thought about what Susan had said, about hurting myself as much as I was hurting Claire. She was right. The revenge, the scheming, it had kept me going, but it had also eaten away at me. I wanted to let it go, to find a way to forgive, but I wasn't there yet. Over the next few days, Claire started texting me, small gestures at first, an apology, a photo of us from years ago, a promise to make things right. I responded cautiously, not wanting to rush into forgiveness. I needed time to process, to decide what I wanted our relationship to be. I also reached out to Diane, not to accuse, but to clear the air. We met again, and I told her the truth about the trip, about how much it had meant to me. She was quiet, her face etched with guilt. "I didn't know," she said. "I thought Claire had it all figured out." I believed her, and for the first time, I saw her not as a rival, but as another woman caught in Claire's choices. I started to reflect on my own role in this. Had I been too controlling, like Claire said? Had I pushed her away without realizing it? I thought about the years after her father left, how I'd thrown myself into work, into providing for her, maybe at the cost of really being there. I wasn't excusing her actions, but I could see how we'd both contributed to the distance between us. It was a hard truth, but it gave me a strange kind of peace. Maybe redemption wasn't just about Claire making amends, it was about me finding a way to let go of the pain and rebuild something new. By the end of the week, Claire invited me to dinner with her and Mark. I hesitated, but I went. It was awkward at first, the air thick with unspoken apologies, but as the night went on, I saw glimpses of the Claire I used to know, her laugh, her warmth, the way she'd lean into me when she was happy. Mark was kind, too, thanking me for giving Claire a chance to make things right. I didn't know if we'd ever fully heal, but for the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same side. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the trip we'd never taken. Maybe it wasn't about Italy, or the money, or even the betrayal. Maybe it was about learning to see each other again, flaws and all, and choosing to keep going. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I wasn't ready to give up on my daughter or on myself. Dinner with Claire and Mark lingered in my mind like a fragile truce, a moment of calm that could either grow or shatter. I wanted to believe we were turning a corner, but the hurt still gnawed at me, a quiet reminder of how far we'd fallen. Claire was trying, she started paying back the money, small installments from her savings, and she called more often, her voice softer, more open. But trust is a slow rebuild, and every time I saw her name on my phone, I felt a mix of hope and caution. I wanted my daughter back, but I couldn't forget the lies, the way she'd looked right through me when she chose Diane. I threw myself into routine to keep the doubts at bay. Work at the hospital was relentless, patients coming and going, their lives a blur of charts and monitors. But it was a distraction, a way to keep my hands busy while my mind wrestled with what came next. Susan noticed the change in me, the way I was quieter, less consumed by anger. "You're healing," she said one day over coffee, her eyes warm but searching. I wasn't so sure. Healing felt too clean a word for the messy tangle of emotions inside me: anger, guilt, longing, all knotted together. Claire invited me to her house again, this time for a family barbecue. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, like she was trying to weave me back into her life. I arrived with a homemade pie, my mother's recipe, a peace offering of sorts. The backyard was alive with laughter, Mark grilling burgers, Diane arranging plates, and a few of their friends milling about. Claire greeted me with a hug, tentative but warm, and for a moment, it felt like old times. But as the afternoon wore on, I caught myself watching her, searching for signs of the daughter I'd lost. She was attentive, making sure I had a drink, introducing me to her friends, but there was a carefulness to it, like she was performing. Diane pulled me aside later, her face lined with unease. "Ellen, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice low. "I didn't know the trip was your plan, your money. I should have asked more questions." Her sincerity caught me off guard. I'd spent so long seeing her as the enemy, the woman who'd stolen my daughter's loyalty, but now I saw her as just another piece in this complicated puzzle. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and she squeezed my hand before walking away. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a start. That night, Claire and I ended up alone in the kitchen, cleaning up while the others lingered outside. The silence between us was heavy, but not hostile. I took a chance. "Claire, I need to know something," I said, drying a plate. "Why didn't you just tell me about Diane? Why the lies?" She froze, her hands in the soapy water, and for a moment, I thought she'd shut down. But then she turned to me, her eyes glistening. "I was scared, Mom. Scared you'd think I was abandoning you. Scared I'd let Diane down. Scared I couldn't balance it all. I thought I could handle it, but I just made it worse." Her words hit me hard, not because they excused her, but because they were honest. For the first time, I saw the pressure she'd been under, the way she'd been pulled in two directions. I didn't let her off the hook, though. "You should have trusted me," I said. "I would have understood, maybe not at first, but I would have tried." She nodded, tears spilling over, and I felt the urge to hug her again, to bridge the gap. This time I did. It was brief, awkward, but it was real. The next few weeks were a slow dance of rebuilding. Claire invited me to small things, a movie night, a walk in the park, and I went, cautious but willing. She started talking about the future, about maybe planning a new trip for just the two of us. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the fear that she'd pull away again. I confided in Susan, who reminded me that trust isn't a switch you flip, it's a muscle you build. "Give her time," she said, "and give yourself some grace." I started journaling, something I hadn't done since I was a young mother. I wrote about Claire, about the betrayal, about the woman I'd become in my quest for revenge. It was painful, seeing my own flaws laid bare, my need for control, my fear of losing her. But it was also freeing, like I was shedding the weight of my anger. I wrote about the future, too, about what I hoped we could be. I didn't know if we'd ever get back to the closeness we'd had, but I wanted to try. One evening, Claire showed up at my house unannounced, a bottle of wine in hand. "Can we just talk?" she asked, her voice small. We sat on my porch, the night air cool, and talked about everything: her marriage, my work, the years we'd let slip by. She apologized again, not just for the trip, but for shutting me out, for assuming I'd always be there no matter what. I apologized too, for the notes, for letting my hurt turn into something darker. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step. As she left, she hugged me, longer this time, and I felt something loosen inside me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I believed we could walk it together. I went to bed that night with a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The flicker of hope I felt after Claire's visit grew, but it was fragile, like a candle in a storm. We were trying, both of us, but the wounds were still fresh, and every step forward came with the fear of slipping back. Claire kept up her efforts, small gestures, like texting me recipes or inviting me to her book club. I went along, wanting to believe in her, but part of me was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd spent so long bracing for betrayal that trust felt like a foreign language, when I was still learning to speak. At work, I started to notice a shift in myself. I was less distracted, more present with my patients. Susan commented on it, saying I seemed lighter, like I was carrying less of a burden. I wasn't sure I agreed, but I couldn't deny that something was changing. Maybe it was the journaling, the way it forced me to face my own role in our fractured relationship. I'd always seen myself as the victim, the wronged mother, but the more I wrote, the more I saw my own mistakes, my tendency to hold too tightly, to expect Claire to fill the gaps her father left behind. One afternoon, Claire called with a proposition, a weekend getaway, just the two of us, to a cabin in the mountains. "No pressure, Mom," she said, "just a chance to start over." My first instinct was to say no, to protect myself from disappointment, but her voice was so earnest, so full of hope, that I couldn't refuse. We set a date, and as the day approached, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. What if this was another empty promise? What if we couldn't find our way back? The cabin was small, rustic, tucked into a grove of pines with a view of a quiet lake. Claire had planned everything: meals, hikes, even a stack of board games for the evenings. It felt like a deliberate echo of the Italy trip we'd never taken, a chance to rewrite that loss. The first day was awkward, both of us tiptoeing around the past, but by the second, we started to relax. We talked about small things at first: her job, my garden, then deeper ones, like her fears about her marriage, my loneliness after her father left. One night, sitting by the fire, Claire brought up the trip again. "I keep thinking about how I hurt you," she said, her eyes fixed on the flames. I was so caught up in trying to be everything for Mark and Diane that I didn't see what I was doing to you. I nodded, my throat tight. I wasn't perfect either, I admitted. I pushed you too hard, expected too much. I didn't give you room to be your own person. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and it felt like a weight lifting. We cried that night, not out of anger, but out of relief, like we were finally letting go of the versions of ourselves we'd been clinging to. Claire reached for my hand, and I held it, feeling the warmth of her skin, the connection we'd almost lost. It wasn't a full reconciliation yet, but it was a foundation, something we could build on. When we got back, things felt different. Claire invited me to more family events, and I started to see Diane and Mark not as threats, but as part of her Lithia life I could share if I let go of my resentment. I even had coffee with Diane again, and we talked openly about what had happened. She apologized again, and I found myself forgiving her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to move on. I kept journaling, using it to sort through the lingering pain. I wrote about Claire's childhood, the moments I'd cherished, her first steps, her laughter, the way she'd cling to me during thunderstorms. I wrote about the years after her father left, how I'd tried to be both parents, how I'd failed sometimes. And I wrote about now, about the woman she was becoming, the mother I wanted to be. One evening, Claire showed up with a surprise, plane tickets. Not to Italy, but to a small coastal town in Maine, a place we'd visited when she was a girl. It's not the same, she said, her eyes bright with hope. But it's a start. I looked at the tickets, my heart swelling, and nodded. It's perfect, I said, and I meant it. As we planned the trip, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The anger was still there, a faint echo, but it was overshadowed by something stronger: love, hope, the belief that we could be more than our mistakes. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew we'd face it together, one step at a time. The tickets to Maine sat on my kitchen counter, a quiet promise of something new. Every time I passed them, I felt a spark of anticipation, but also a nagging fear that this could unravel like the last trip. Claire was trying. I could see that her calls were more frequent, her apologies more sincere, but trust was still a tightrope, and I wasn't sure either of us was steady enough to cross it fully. I kept journaling, pouring out my hopes and doubts, trying to make sense of the mother I wanted to be and the daughter I was learning to understand. Claire invited me to help plan the Maine trip, and we spent an evening at her house, flipping through travel guides and reminiscing about our old visits to the coast. She laughed about the time she'd chased seagulls until she fell face first in the sand, and I teased her about her obsession with clam chowder. For a moment, it felt like we were us again, the mother and daughter who could share anything. But when Mark came home, the dynamic shifted. He was warm, welcoming, but I saw the way Claire's eyes flicked to him, seeking approval. It reminded me of how she'd been with Diane, and I wondered if she'd ever feel that free with me again. I decided to confront that fear head-on. The next day, I asked Claire to meet me for lunch, just the two of us. We sat at a small diner, the kind of place we used to love, and I laid it out. I need to know you're in this for us, Claire, not just to make things right with Mark or Diane. I need to know I'm not just an obligation. Her face softened, and she reached for my hand. You're not, Mom. I want Thysis. I'm trying to figure out how to balance everything, but I promise, you're my priority. Her words felt genuine, but I'd been burned before. I nodded, choosing to believe her, at least for now. We started spending more time together, small moments that built on the cabin weekend. We went to a pottery class, laughing as our lopsided bowls collapsed, and took long walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing. I started to see the Claire I'd missed, the one who could be silly, vulnerable, real. But I also saw her struggles, the way she was still navigating her role as a wife, a daughter-in-law, a daughter. I tried to give her space, to let her find her way, but it wasn't easy. Every time she mentioned Diane or Mark, I felt a pang, a reminder of the betrayal that still lingered. One evening, Diane called me, her voice hesitant. She wanted to meet, to talk about Claire. I agreed, curious but wary. We met at the same cafe as before, and she looked older, more tired. I've been thinking about what you said, she started. About the trip, about how it hurt you. I want to make it right. She offered to pay half the cost of the villa, saying it was only fair since she'd benefited from it. I was stunned, not just by the offer, but by the sincerity behind it. I declined, not because I didn't want the money, but because I didn't want this to be about transactions anymore. It's not about the money, I said. It's about Claire. She nodded, understanding, and we parted with a quiet respect. That conversation shifted something in me. I realized I'd been holding on to Diane as a symbol of everything I'd lost, But she wasn't the enemy. She was just another woman trying to hold her family together. I started to let go of my resentment, not just for her, but for Claire. I didn't want to be the mother who kept score, who held grudges. I wanted to be the mother who showed up, who loved without conditions. The main trip was a week away, and Claire and I were buzzing with plans. We'd booked a small inn by the ocean, planned hikes and lobster dinners, even a boat tour to see the lighthouses. It wasn't Italy, but it didn't need to be. It was ours, a chance to rebuild what we'd almost lost. The night before we left, Claire came over with a gift of photo album filled with pictures from our past, from her childhood to now. The last page had a note. "Here's to new memories, Mom. I love you." I cried reading it, not out of pain, but out of gratitude. We left for Maine the next morning, the car filled with music and laughter. As we drove, I felt the weight of the past years start to lift, not gone, but lighter. Claire reached for my hand at a stoplight, and I squeezed it back, a silent promise that we'd keep trying, keep fighting for each other. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, I believed we could travel it together. Maine was everything I hadn't dared hope for. The inn was a weathered, clapboard building perched on a cliff, the ocean crashing below, and the air smelled of salt and pine. Claire and I fell into an easy rhythm, waking early for coffee on the porch, hiking trails that wound through forests and along rocky shores. We really talked about her dreams, my fears, the years we'd let slip by. There were no grand apologies or dramatic confessions, just the quiet work of being together, of rediscovering the bond we'd nearly lost. One afternoon, we sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, watching fishing boats bob in the distance. Claire turned to me, her face soft but serious. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been talking to a therapist about everything, Mark, Diane, you." I didn't realize how much I was carrying, how much I was trying to prove. I listened, my heart aching for her, but also proud. She was trying to understand herself, to grow, and that was more than I'd dared hope. "I'm glad," I said, "and I'm here, whatever you need." She smiled, a real smile, and for the first time in months, I felt like her mother again, not her adversary. We spent our days exploring lighthouse tours, lobster shacks, a small bookstore where we bought novels to read aloud to each other. At night, we'd sit by the inn's fireplace, playing cards or just talking. I told her stories about my own mother, about the sacrifices she'd made, and Claire shared her fears about balancing her life with Mark's family. "I don't want to lose you again," she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. I reached for her hand, my eyes stinging. "You won't," I promised, and I meant it. When we got back, the real world felt both heavier and lighter. Claire was still paying back the money, and I could tell it strained her, but she never complained. I started to see her efforts for what they were, not just atonement, but a desire to rebuild. I invited her and Mark over for dinner, a small step toward integrating our lives again. Diane came too, and though it was awkward at first, we found a rhythm, talking about simple things, movies, recipes, the weather. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I kept journaling, using it to process the trip, to capture the moments that felt like turning points. I wrote about Claire's laugh, the way it echoed the little girl she used to be, and about my own growth, the way I was learning to let go of control. I even wrote a letter to my younger self, forgiving her for the mistakes I'd made as a mother, for the times I'd been too hard or too absent. It was cathartic, a way to make peace with the past, so I could move forward. One evening, Claire called with an idea, a family trip, all of us, me, her, Mark, Diane, to celebrate her birthday. I hesitated, the memory of Italy still sharp, but she was insistent. "It's different this time, Mom. It's about all of us, together." I agreed, and we started planning a small getaway to a lake house nearby. It wasn't grand, but it didn't need to be. It was about being a family, flaws and all. As the trip approached, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. I wanted this to work, not just for Claire, but for me. I wanted to believe we could be a family that included Diane and Mark, that I didn't have to compete for my daughter's love. The night before we left, I found myself staring at the old Italy itinerary, the one I'd planned so carefully. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet sadness for what might have been. I tucked it away in a drawer, a reminder of how far we'd come. The lake house was bustling with energy when we arrived. Claire's laughter, Mark's bad jokes, Diane's stories about her own childhood vacations. I watched them, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. Claire caught my eye across the room and smiled, a look that said she was glad I was there. For the first time, I felt like I belonged, not as the wrong mother, but as part of something bigger. That night, as we sat around a bonfire, I realized something. This wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something new. Claire wasn't the little girl I'd raised, and I wasn't the mother I'd been. We were both changing, growing, learning to love each other in a new way. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The lake house trip was a turning point, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. We laughed, argued, burned marshmallows, and stayed up too late playing cards. Claire and I stole moments alone, walking along the shore, talking about the future or hopes for a family, my dreams of retiring somewhere quiet. Diane and Mark were there, too, not as intruders, but as part of the messy, beautiful thing we were building. I saw Claire's effort to include me, to make sure I felt valued, and it softened the last edges of my resentment. Back home, life settled into a new normal. Claire and I kept our weekly dinners, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Mark and Diane. The money was fully paid back, and though it had been a point of contention, it felt like a closed chapter. I started to see Diane differently, not as a rival, but as someone who loved Claire in her own way. We even started a book club together, a small group that included Susan, and it became a space where we could all be ourselves, no pretenses. I kept journaling, but the entries were less about pain and more about gratitude. I wrote about Claire's growth, how she was learning to balance her loyalties without losing herself. I wrote about my own journey, how I'd let go of the need to control, to be the center of her world. I even wrote about forgiveness, not just for Claire, but for myself, for the years I'd spent blaming myself for our distance. One day, Claire showed up with a surprise, a framed photo from the main trip, the two of us laughing on the beach, the ocean sparkling behind us. "I want you to remember this," she said, her eyes bright. "Not the bad stuff, but this." I hung it in my living room, a reminder of what we'd fought for. It wasn't Italy, but it was better it was ours. As the months passed, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Claire and I weren't perfect, but we were honest. We talked about the hard things, her fears, my regrets, and we listened. I started to see her not just as my daughter, but as a woman with her own life, her own struggles, her own strength. And I saw myself differently, too, not as a victim, but as someone who'd faced betrayal and chosen to rebuild. One evening, as we sat on my porch with glasses of wine, Claire brought up Italy. "Maybe we'll go someday," she said, her voice wistful. "Just you and me." I smiled, feeling no urgency, no pain. "Maybe," I said, "but we've got time." And we did. Time to keep growing, to keep healing, to keep choosing each other. Looking back, I realized the betrayal had been a catalyst, a painful but necessary break that forced us to confront our flaws and rebuild stronger. I'd started this journey wanting revenge, wanting to make Claire pay, but I'd ended it wanting something better for both of us. I'd learned that justice wasn't about punishment, but about understanding, about finding a way to move forward. As I closed my journal that night, I wrote one final entry. "We're not perfect, but we're family. And that's enough." I set the pen down, feeling a quiet certainty that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The storm was over, and the skies were clear, not flawless, but beautiful in their own way.